This quaint, picturesque village of Eyam holds stories of unthinkable horror. In 1665 to 1666, this tight-knit community would be ravished by an unforgiving plague. A plague that wiped out over 100,000 Londoners before making its way to the sleepy little village. It's reported that around 260 villagers died over a 14-month period, wiping out entire families by the day. And it all started with a bundle of cloth that was delivered from London to the front door of Alexander Hadfield's tailors. His assistant George Vickers had been sent to London for material during the outbreak of the plague, and when he arrived back at the house, he returned with more than just fabric. The box was taken into the house and the contents removed, as they were soaking wet through, and they were left to dry by the roaring fire. And what seemed like an innocent and meaningless task proved to be a catastrophic and fatal error, as the drenched fabric was harbouring the plague-bearing fleas. The fleas that came off the rats back in London. And it wasn't long before the plague took its very first victim, that being George Vickers, followed by the rest of the household. But by this point, the spread of the infection had already begun, as others became ill shortly after, and the bubonic plague had come to claim the lives of the poor villagers of Eyam, and there was nothing they could do about it. Symptoms included aching of the limbs, an uncontrollable fever, delirium and troublesome dreams, pain in the heart and a profusion of damp cold sweats. Large red lumps would form around the neck, which was nicknamed a ring of roses, inspiring the nursery rhyme that we all know too well. These would be popped with a red-hot poker, as it was believed to rid the disease. But this theory proved to be useless. With villagers dying by the day, the village was declared locked down. A bold and brave decision made by the priest, William Mompesson. He made a courageous and heroic effort to isolate. Nobody could come into here. Nobody could leave. And to stop the spread of the plague, families heartbreakingly had to bury their own family members after each death. As if it wasn't hard enough coping with the loss of a loved one. But there was no time to mourn, as most likely the loss of another member was only around the corner. People would bury their loved ones in gardens, plots of land or meadows, away from the church, as this was off limits. The haunting doom of fear must have plagued the mind of so many of the survivors. They will have always been conscious that the possibility of death was looming over the shoulders at all times. A dreaded glance out the window, and you would most likely have witnessed a grave being dug, or the haunting sound of the heels of the plague doctor making his way across the flags and cobbled streets. And that suppressed emotion of fear has never left the village. And at times the sorrow can be felt, whether it's in the howling of the wind or when you find the still moment. The atmosphere cuts like a knife. Mingling was only allowed at a safe distance, and to listen to the sermon of the priest, who constantly begged the Lord to put an end to this terrible plague. A meeting point was arranged, a place that's known as Cucklet Delph. It's a cave-like structure which allowed Montpesson's voice to be heard and carried from afar due to the acoustics of the rock formation he was in. His words preached was that Jesus sacrificed himself for us, and we shall do the same for others. And the key to survival was the boundary stone. This boulder was put in place as a means for food and medicine to be exchanged from the nearby village, Stony Middleton. Holes were carved into the stone and doused in vinegar, and the coins were placed into the holes, as it was a way of sterilising the coins. Goods could be left in exchange for money and taken back to the village, and hundreds of years later, the stone still remains at the top of the hill. An eerie reminder of the time that the plague hit Eyam.
Right, so there you have it. That was a brief overview of the history of this, what this poor little village actually went through. I've been to Eyam before, and I didn't really document it. I just literally came for the day. But it's very strange. Like, unless you're here, you won't really know. But it's such a beautiful, quaint, tiny little village, and it's still so still in parts. Like eerily quiet, and you can hear like a pin drop, and then all of a sudden there'll be like a coach load of people getting off and coming on a bit of a tour around here, and it's crazy. But when you find a still moment, it's really hard to explain. But for me, I get this feeling of, you can feel the sorrow and you can feel the pain that the villagers actually went through still to this day, and it's so relatable to what we actually went through with the pandemic. You know, who'd have thought a few hundred years later that we'd be going through a similar time. But back then they didn't have any sort of knowledge, they didn't have any sort of clue on how to treat or cure, or, you know, all they basically knew is that don't make contact with people. But these poor people went through absolute hell in 1665, 1666. So what I want to do in this video now is, you will have seen the history in the beginning. So now let's go and have a look at some of the locations that I find quite interesting. So I'll be taking a bit of a trip around this graveyard, and also visiting some of the houses where the sort of outbreak started and everything like that. So I'm going to shut up now, and I'm going to flip the camera around and take you on a bit of a tour. Right, so we're just making our way over now to the first row of cottages. But just look how stunning they are, how beautiful they are. Beautiful stonework. And then it says here, Rose Cottage, 9 members of the Thorpe family lived here, they all died. So Thomas Thorpe, 1665 on September the 26th, then the 30th of September, then in October, December, April, then there was 2 in May. The 2 sons, they died. And William and Mary Thorpe, the parents of Thomas Senior, died 1666. Such a shame. And then we'll move over. Now this is pivotal to the story, because this is where it all took place, because this is where George Vickers delivered the bundle of fabric and made his way to this door here. And it says here on the plaque, it says Plague Cottage. Mary Hadfield, formerly Cooper, lived there with her 2 sons, Edward and Jonathan, and her husband Alexander Hadfield. Now he was the guy that was the tailor. And employed hand George Vickers. George Vickers was the first plague victim, and he died on the 7th of September 1665. And if you just scroll down to there, Alexander Hadfield died on the 3rd of August. So, and then it says at the bottom as well, it says Mary alone survived but lost 13 relatives. But this is basically this is where the actual plague started, and it all broke out. The outbreak started right here, and it's crazy to think that just these 2 little cottages alone had like over, what would it be, like maybe 20 deaths in total. But you can just imagine people like coming over, you know, the screams from the houses, coming over to the neighbour's house. They've probably said, what's going on, what's going on? They've then ran into the house and they've seen like George Vickers, you know, has passed away, and they're thinking, what's going on? And then everybody gets ill, and they're just spreading and contaminating one another. And eventually, over the course of 14 months, 75% of the population of this village perished as a result of the plague that all started behind that very door. So we're just going to make our way into St. Lawrence's church and take you for a bit of a walk around the graveyard. Now, when this plague hit the village, they basically closed the church straight away because they didn't want anyone to sort of contract it in the same sort of methods that we use during like lockdown, social distancing, stuff like that. But this was the heartbeat of Eyam, and like I say, this was closed for the benefit of everybody really, and it was Montpesson that sort of made the announcement and said that we're going to close it. Now I've just been speaking to the vicar in here, and he's such a nice guy. He took me around the actual church and it's stunning inside. But he was really, really nice, such a nice guy. And he was telling us about his sort of predecessors really. But I wanted to just take you over here. Now, this is the sort of tomb, should we say, of Catherine Montpesson. Now this was Montpesson's, the vicar, this was his wife's, this is his wife's tomb basically. And she died, she contracted the plague sadly through helping others. She was helping others out, and from what I believe with the dead bodies and stuff like that. But she ended up contracting it herself. But if you just look at this slab that we've got here, if you notice, there's a different sort of bit of stonework here. Now they spelt her name wrong, and then later on corrected it. But it sort of stands out a mile, doesn't it? But I suppose during the pandemic, you know, spelling was the last thing on people's minds. And then, if I just take you over here, this is a brilliant, honestly, such a brilliant cemetery. Full of little quirks and things, like hidden things. But this bit here, this is like where the herbs are planted. Now these herbs, this bit of a herb garden, sorry, I'll just bend you down. This is where basically, these were the herbs that we used back in the day. And you know, you can see that they used them in daily life, and also the plague doctor would have had his, the beak of the mask would have been filled with herbs such as these. So it says that they used rosemary to disinfect and freshen the sick room. Balm, soothing effect on nervous conditions and healing wounds. They used rue, which carried in nose grey to ward off the plague by its pungent smell. So that was probably the herb that was in the plague mask. And thyme, which was a sedative and antiseptic qualities, helps cough and digestion. But I just find it, you know, amazing that they're still growing the same sort of herbs that were used back when this little quaint village had to deal with the plague. Fascinating.
The spring and the summer sees the plague claim many more lives as the fleas began to reproduce. This caused hysteria and panic amongst the villagers. The local gravedigger was kept in business, but charged a pretty penny to deal with the bodies, as his life was at risk too. Throughout walking around the village, the scars of the past are evident to see. a short walk up Lydgate, and the remains of an old family plot can be witnessed, amongst other plaques throughout the village. It's hard to imagine the terror that the families went through. The presence of the plague doctor, skulking around in the dead of night, making his way door to door. It must have been a terrifying sight, a constant reminder of death only yards apart, with each street telling its own tale.
So I've just made my way up Lydgate here. This is called Lydgate, and at the side of this cottage it says, during the Middle Ages this was a main road into the village. The male inhabitants had to take it in turns to stand watch and ward from 9 p.m. till 6 a.m. at the gate near here, and question any strangers wishing to enter the village. It says Mary Rowland, December the 1st, 1665, and Abel Rowland, January the 15th, 1666, died in cottages near here. So this place is steeped in history, and I've just noticed this here in the wall actually. There's an old coin, 2013, old penny. But up this very unassuming road, we find another like piece of the puzzle, because this, where I'm stood right now, this is an actual grave site for two members, and it says the Lydgate graves. The grave of George Darby, who died on the 4th of July 1666, and his daughter Mary, aged 20, who died on the 4th of September 1666. George's wife survived and died in 1674. So, you know, like I said, they were buried on patches of land, in back gardens and in meadows that they owned. And on this sort of unassuming road is an actual burial site for two people. And this is Mary's grave here. And it's sort of, you know, in a bit of a stone circle. But if you just listen for 1 second, this is how quiet it is, and I hope my voice is being picked up, because I'm not trying to speak loud because there's people with the windows and doors open, you know. But this is an actual grave plot for two of the victims that perished in the plague, basically, the villagers of Eyam. And there's houses and cars, and there's a jacuzzi over there. Do you know what I mean? And then right next to it is their actual plague victims here that perished in 1665 and 1666. Right, so here we are. And this right here is the boundary stone. And a meeting point basically where the villagers of Stony Middleton, which is this way, and the villagers of Eyam would sort of meet to this point at separate times, obviously, and the villagers of Stony Middleton would leave supplies here, whether it be medicine, food, and then once they'd picked it up and they'd gone, the people from Eyam would come over and collect the goods. And in these holes that you can see here, these are where these would have been filled like they are now with rainwater. They'd have been filled with vinegar to sterilise the coins, and they'd leave the actual coins in these holes right here as a method of payment towards the villagers of Stony Middleton. Basically, this is what they had to do for the 14 months. But it's a beautiful location, and you can just imagine, other than the sort of fencing around the sides, it'd look exactly like this back in 1666. But I'm gonna put my hard-earned YouTube money, which is 22p, and I'm gonna donate it into the actual boundary stone. So this was a pivotal part of survival for the poor villagers of Eyam.
As the population dwindled, all that remained were the survivors. They carried on with their lives, bearing the heartache of losing their friends and families. Their lives never the same again. But the stance that they took to lock the village down and sacrifice themselves is nothing less than heroic. And without doing what they did, many of us may never have been born today, as the plague would have ravished not only towns, but cities too. And as a result, our ancestors may never have been born. And for that, we should be forever grateful for the sacrifice that this little community took in order for us to be here today.
So upon reflection, you've got to take your hat off to the villagers of Eyam, or Eyam. You have to take your hat off to them. They basically locked this village down and basically sacrificed their lives so that others could live, because Montpesson said that Jesus sacrificed his life for us, and we will do the same. And no doubt in my mind that if they didn't take the stand that they did and go to the measures that they did, that thousands, if not millions, would have definitely have died. And who knows, that one of our ancestors might have caught the plague and we might not have even been born as a result of the people of Eyam and their bravery and courage of what they did. And my heart goes out to every single person that, and the families that died here. And God forbid the survivors, what they must have gone through back then. Times were really, really hard. And families were wiped out, like 13 in one family died and one survivor. And then you have to bury your own. Like, how heartbreaking must that be? Not only are you grieving because you've lost a family member, you've lost all of your family, and then you have to find it within you somehow to then bury them. It's unimaginable. And they were cut from a different cloth in this village, that's for sure. But I've got nothing but respect and admiration for the bravery and courage that this little village shown. So I'm going to leave it here. So thank you very much for watching. Thanks for taking the time out to watch it. I hope you enjoyed it. And it's something a little bit different at Halloween. It's not necessarily a scary video, but it's got the atmosphere and the eeriness of this little village. And if, like I say, if you are ever about or you want somewhere to go, I can't recommend this place enough. It's a beautiful village and very, very, insightful. So I'm going to leave it here. Thank you for watching. If you like this video, please consider subscribing to the channel. It will push us that little bit and helps us revive stories and gets people out and about, because they probably will watch this and then want to come themselves. So thanks very much. Take care, have a great Halloween, and I'll see you all soon. Cheers.